Hello, everyone. My name is Maya Locker, and I'm the Director of Programs and Events here at the museum at Eldridge Street. For those who haven't visited us before, the museum at Eldridge Street is housed in the historic and beautifully restored Eldridge Street Synagogue. Built in 1887, it was the first grand synagogue built by Eastern European Jews in the U.S., and we offer both in-person and virtual programming, and you can find all of our public programming listed on our website at eldridgestreet.org/events. Before we begin, I just wanted to mention some programming coming up. We have multiple walking tours, including our Sights, Sounds, and Synagogues of Greenwich Village tour this Friday, as well as Synagogues of the Lower East Side this Sunday. So if you're interested in either of those, you can check those out on our events calendar. We are also gearing up for all of our Hanukkah programming here at Eldridge Street, so please check out our events calendar for everything we have coming up next month, virtual and in person, culminating in our annual winter concert on December 25th. If you're interested in the winter concert, please get your tickets now, because as our frequent attendees know, those sell out really fast. This program this evening is in conjunction with our current photography exhibition, Lower East Side 1975, Portrait of a Changing Jewish Neighborhood, which is closing on November 23rd. So please come down and check it out. It's really wonderful. If you're in person, we'd love to see you at the museum. If you're not local, we are featured on the Bloomberg Connects app, and you can check out the exhibition digitally as well as some other content on there. So either way, please check it out before it closes. Our next exhibition, First Light, Birth in the Jewish Tradition, is opening on December 4th during an evening reception. Now to introduce our speakers this evening. Dr. Segan and her husband, Brodie Hefner, manage the Arthur Rothstein Legacy Project. Together, they develop publications, educational programs, and exhibitions on the life and career of Anne's father, renowned social documentary photographer and photojournalist Arthur Rothstein. Dr. Segan's academic studies focused on fine arts, the history of photography, and the application of creative arts for healing and social change. Her earlier career focused on visual storytelling and photographs in oral history projects. Her work was celebrated at the Center for the Book at the Library of Congress. Mr. Hefner is a retired urban planner and affordable housing specialist, and for 20 years, he's been a diligent student of topics related to photography and cultural heritage archive management. Both are active members and contributors to the work of American Photography Archive Group and the Living New Deal. And with that, I would like to turn the screen over to Anne and Brodie. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maya. So hello, I'm Anne Rothstein-Segan, and I'm excited to be here in connection with Mr. Sackel's documentary photography exhibit. My father, Arthur Rothstein, began his career as a social documentary photographer. Beyond the shared enthusiasm for documentary photography, Mr. Sackles and my father also share some cultural heritage that's common to Jewish immigrant families, including connections to the Lower East Side. Today, my husband, Brodie Hefner, and I will share a little of Arthur Rothstein's personal and family history, along with photo stories drawn from his illustrious 50-year career in social documentary photography and photojournalism. My mom was also a photographer, so you can imagine we had a pretty terrific family photo album, and at the end of our talk, I'll share a few of those family pictures. Well, here we go. This collage includes just a portion of my father's countless press passes and ID cards. It gives you some idea of the breadth of his work for half a dozen government agencies and some of America's most popular magazines. But let's start with some family history and the formative experiences that launched Dad on his career. This 1902 photo shows my father's family in the old country. Arthur Rothstein's father, Izzy Rothstein, actually it was changed to Rothstein, we pronounce it, is pictured here standing behind his parents, Rabbi Talasim Rothstein and his wife, Davora. On Izzy's right is his older brother, Jacob. Izzy was born in 1889, so he would have been 13 in this picture, and this portrait was probably taken on the occasion of his bar mitzvah. The family lived in Rakov, a shtetl in the Minsk region of what is now Belarus.
So, as many of you know, for over 100 years, most Jews in Russia had been forced to live in the southwestern portion of the vast Russian Empire shown here. It's the area known as the Pale of Settlement. In the early 20th century, brutal oppression and murderous pogroms targeted the 5 million Jews in the Pale, or what had originally been 5 million. Jewish teenagers were also subject to forced conscription by the Russian army and Cossack military units. Rabbi Rothstein had already lost 2 older sons to military conscription. So a couple of years after this portrait, the military came looking for when the military came looking for young men to fight in the Russo-Japanese War, the rabbi told Izzy and Jacob to flee. They left the Pale and traveled across several countries on foot and eventually immigrated to America. They were not alone, obviously. An estimated 2 million, appeared various numbers, but probably well over 2 million Jews fled the Pale and immigrated to America during these decades. Many of them arrived in New York and passed through or settled in the Lower East Side of New York, in Manhattan.
Knowing this history, Dad was always drawn to stories of immigrants, refugees, and people dispossessed by forces beyond their control. Throughout his life, he promoted the use of photography as an instrument of communication for the good of society. Arthur felt compelled to help repair the world in accordance with the Jewish concept of tikkun olam, which for him was synonymous with taking action in pursuit of social justice. Here are Izzy and Jacob now seeking their fortunes in America. This was about the time Izzy married my grandma Nettie and started a family. Their first child was Arthur Rothstein, and he was born in 1915. This portrait of the brothers was made in a photo studio at 331 Grand Street on the Lower East Side, a short walk from the Eldridge Street Synagogue. In this image from about 1927, Izzy is pictured with Nettie and their 3 sons. Arthur, the oldest on the left, is about 13, so this was probably a bar mitzvah portrait also. He was a first-generation American raised in a Yiddish-speaking Orthodox home in the Bronx. Izzy Rothstein started a successful company, Congo Tire, on 18th Street and 10th Avenue in Manhattan, serving the growing New York City automobile market. Arthur received a camera for his bar mitzvah, and he and his uncle built a darkroom together, and Arthur learned how to process film. He used his new camera to take this interesting portrait of his uncle by matchlight. In 1931, at age 15, Arthur graduated from Stuyvesant High School here in New York. That's him front and center with the members of the Senior Class Engineering Club. Hi, Dad. In those days, boys younger than 16 wore short pants, not trousers, so there he is in his short pants. In the fall of 1931, at age 16, Arthur entered Columbia University. At Columbia, he set up the Camera Club. The members are shown here visiting the newly opened George Washington Bridge over the Hudson River between New Jersey and New York City. During college, Arthur earned extra money making photocopies for one of his professors, Roy Stryker.
And this relationship with Roy Stryker would soon change Arthur's life and really launch his career. Professor Stryker had co-authored a textbook that was heavily illustrated with photographs, many by pioneering social documentary photographer Louis Hine, like this picture you see here. Stryker's 1925 textbook was one of the first to use social documentary photography for education. The photocopies Arthur was making for Stryker were for Stryker's next planned book, an encyclopedia of American agriculture. But that book, as we'll see in a moment, was cut short and never came to fruition. During Arthur's college years, the nation had been suffering economic and social dislocation caused by the Great Depression. And of course, in 1932, Franklin D. Roosevelt had won his first presidential bid. By 1935, his administration was implementing countless New Deal programs to address bank failures, unemployment approaching 25%, and a rural crisis caused by collapsing farm prices, among other things. one of FDR's New Deal programs was an enormous new agency created in 1935, the Resettlement Administration. It was designed to assist struggling and displaced farmers, industrial workers, and rural communities throughout the country by providing grants, loans, and financing for farms and related businesses and new housing in some cases as well. It would later become part of the Farm Security Administration and the Department of Agriculture. In 1935, the Roosevelt administration recruited Roy Stryker to promote the Resettlement Administration. He never returned to that book project. Stryker believed that photographs held enormous potential for advancing education and social justice, so he assembled a team of photographers. That was his intent. Let's get a team of photographers together. This photo unit, as it was referred to, would document the agency's work and provide visual evidence that Americans needed assistance from their government. It was very hard for people in the cities to know what was happening in the countryside and vice versa in those days. Right after Arthur's graduation from Columbia in June of 1935, Stryker offered Arthur a job helping to set up the photo unit in Washington. And of course, in the Depression, a job sounded pretty good. So he went down to Washington, helped Stryker set up studios in a dark room and hire photographers and so on. And this was the beginning of a very productive decade of government service for Arthur Rothstein. He was the first photographer Stryker hired, but eventually the photo unit had more than a dozen photographers, including several women. Here's Stryker with a couple of those other photographers, Russell Lee and John Vachon, and of course, Arthur. Now, we mentioned photographer Lewis Hine. His pioneering work in the decades prior to this had directly inspired Stryker and Arthur Rothstein in their later work at the New Deal photo unit. And they had actually had him come and speak to the photo club and to classes at Columbia, so they really knew Lewis Hine. And Hine had been working extensively for the National Child Labor Committee to demonstrate and his work there demonstrated the power of pictures to raise public awareness and spark social action. And this article from Good Housekeeping magazine is a great example of this. Hine's photographs illustrated this widely read article in Good Housekeeping in November of 1913, going back a few years now, asking Americans to consider the children who picked the berries for their cranberry sauce. Now, Hine was famous for his pictures of children working in cotton mills and so on, but he also did pictures like this of children working in agricultural fields. So publication of this article was timed to provoke middle-class families preparing this traditional dish for their Thanksgiving meals. And the article kind of went viral and got a lot of repeat press and so on and caused quite a sensation. And as you see, the photo caption for this Hine photo in the article says, "Into your cranberry sauce may go the berries she picked while your little girl was in school." Mm-hmm. The image on the left appeared in the Good Housekeeping article from Hine's visit to the cranberry bogs of New Jersey in 1913. And later, Arthur's image on the right shows the exact same farm 25 years later, revealing that still Italian immigrant children were being pulled from the classroom to help bring in the harvest in September and October and into November. Lewis Hine's landmark 1909 speech outlining his vision for what he called social photography included Hine's statement that, "With a picture thus sympathetically interpreted, what a lever we have for the social uplift." So that was really the essence of what became social documentary photography. Mm-hmm. In 1938, President Roosevelt did sign the Fair Labor Standards Act that began to reduce oppressive child labor practices, along with some other later legislation. And here's some examples of how Stryker's photo unit made very innovative use of photographs for its day. And this was one of its own promotional posters showing work of the agency across the country. And it's a great example of how Stryker used photographs. A little close-up here shows that he used photographs to transform abstract ideas like helping the needy or preventing soil erosion into concrete illustrations of specific agency actions in the field and new housing they were building and so on. The beneficiaries became not abstractions, but now real people that the public could see. They could see their faces, their homes, their farms. And we take this sort of publicity and public relations for granted nowadays, but it was really quite radical in 1935.
Despite his excellent education, Arthur was a city boy and had not traveled beyond the New York City limit. He didn't even know how to drive until Stryker hired him and Dad moved to Washington, D.C. He spent the next 7 years driving around the United States on photo assignments that could last for weeks or months. Dad carried several cameras, lots of film and equipment. He often slept in his car, so he had a sleeping bag, a portable stove, and a coffee maker. Dad traveled on dirt roads, so he had an axe to chop down the trees that got in the way and a shovel to dig himself out of snow and mud.
Real adventure.
Yeah. In the fall of 1935, Stryker gave Arthur one of his first big assignments. In the hills of Virginia, hundreds of families were being relocated out of what would soon become Shenandoah National Park, the first national park in the eastern United States. In the parkland, high up in isolated mountain hollows, families were living in very primitive conditions. Look at this house.
Yeah, real 19th century way of life.
Yeah,
there.
they even spoke a different language. They had their own language. Yeah. Arthur created a picture story illustrating a way of life that would soon be lost forever. In response to the picture story, the federal government relocated the displaced families to new homes in the foothills just below the park.
And those are still there. We went and saw Resettlement Street and other areas.
Very nice
Still
houses.
nice little neighborhoods near the park.
The displacement and relocation of families from Shenandoah National Park was covered by newspapers and magazines across the country.
So that wasn't the only story that was getting coverage related to the agency's work. So during the 1930s, there was a major crisis in the Great Plains, and this was right in their wheelhouse. So and this crisis was due to both man-made causes that were compounded by natural disaster, natural causes. So farmers during the earlier decades had plowed up millions of acres of grassland, ancient grasslands that had protected the soil to plant wheat in the manner you're seeing here with virgin grasslands being plowed up. This exposed the fragile topsoil. And then after a multi-year drought, the region's high winds picked up the exposed soil and created massive dust storms and a lot of bad erosion problems. The worst conditions were in the Texas and Oklahoma panhandles, the so-called Dust Bowl. This is a very flat and windy part of the country, so preventing soil erosion was very challenging in these conditions. Black clouds of dust and sand would sweep across the plains as a result, and in this image from the Texas Panhandle, Arthur shows a car being chased by an enormous dust storm. Hundreds of thousands of people were leaving the Great Plains because of their failed farms and so on, and this map shows their major migration routes, Route 66 to the south and other routes to the north, where families were heading west to California, Washington, and Oregon. Arthur documented the plight of these internal American migrants when he encountered them on the road, homeless and in search of work and stability. And Arthur spent a lot of time in that area that summer, which turned out to be the hottest summer of the century, I think, as well. Just was a real natural disaster.
This is Vernon Evans of Lemon, South Dakota. Dad photographed him near Missoula, Montana on Highway 10. He and his family had left their drought-stricken farm for a new start in Oregon. En route, they traveled in a tent they lived in a tent and covered about 200 miles a day in their Model T Ford. Wow, look at those tires. And you could see, it tells you exactly when the picture was taken. Look at the license plate, South Dakota, 1936. The title of this photograph is Family Forced to Move by Drought, South Dakota, 1936. Arthur's coverage of the plight and migration of farmers from the Dust Bowl inspired John Steinbeck while he was writing The Grapes of Wrath.
And we could talk more about that in the question period, but that Pulitzer Prize winning book and the Oscar winning movie that came from it, those were produced right in real time during this era and really focused a lot of attention on these problems along with these photographs from the Resettlement Administration.
Arthur also documented many who remained. They hoped to wait out the drought and save their crops and their livestock. I don't know. It was difficult for most Americans to imagine the severe conditions in the Dust Bowl area, so Stryker assigned Arthur then just 20 years old, to go there and send back photographs. In the Oklahoma Panhandle, drought and dust had ruined countless farms, leaving many at risk of starvation. Near Boise City, Oklahoma, he stopped to speak with farmer Art Coble, who is digging a fence post out of a sand drift. As they spoke, the wind picked up and the stinging sand began to blow. The farmer and his two young sons, Milton and Darrell, ran for the house, and Dad ran for his car. Dad turned around to wave goodbye and took this picture. It became an iconic symbol of the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression, and one of the most widely reproduced photographs of the 20th century. Years later, Arthur reflected on his famous Dust Bowl image and why it had touched so many. He felt his picture put a human face on the situation and promoted empathy. These were real people being affected by this crisis. You may be relieved to know what happened to the Coble family. On the 25th anniversary of his assignment, Dad returned to photograph the farm. The two men here are Milton and Darrell, the two boys from the original photograph, and one of their sons. The rains eventually did return to the Panhandle, and despite years of hardship, the family stuck it out and remained in the area.
Stryker's photo unit provided images about the Dust Bowl to newspapers, of course, including the New York Times. And here's an interesting 1936 two-page spread using stories from Arthur and others in the photo unit. And the headline, if you can't read it, says, "Dust, Drought, and Erosion Sweep 50 million Midwest acres while the government fights to lift the pall of misery and desolation." So that kind of captures the spirit of what was happening out there. And there were many other stories that Arthur covered that got press, like this one that was in Missouri, in the Boot Heel area of southern Missouri, where landowners had all mechanized their farms in very short order and evicted more than 1,000 sharecroppers who had lived on their property and worked it for years in some cases. And the sharecroppers and tenant farmers demonstrated their plight by kind of camping out alongside the highway with some organizers helping them. Arthur found, when he got there, he found Missouri State Police forcing families to move away from the road, and got pictures like this one. First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt saw news about the situation and successfully lobbied her husband to intervene with loans and housing assistance. So she was a great champion of many Farm Security Administration programs. Here's an urban scene not far from where Arthur grew up in the Bronx, coincidentally. Many residents in this community at the time were unemployed Jewish garment workers. And the agency that he worked for built an experimental community called Jersey Homesteads in Monmouth County, New Jersey, and recruited Bronx residents from this neighborhood to go live there. Jersey Homesteads included new housing, a school, some farmland, and a garment factory designed to employ several hundred residents. The project built on some long-standing previous residents by Jewish organizations and foundations and labor unions to create employment and farming opportunities for Jewish immigrants. The community's innovative modernist housing was designed by famous architect Louis Kahn. Shortly after FDR's death, the community was renamed Roosevelt, New Jersey. And Roosevelt is still an active community today. It's an artist colony, and the farming and the garment factory didn't last very long, but the housing and the community are persevered and are still there. Over time, Stryker expanded the mission of his photo unit. He realized that they were getting a pretty broad coverage of the nation, and he wanted them to create a complete documentary portrait of America, kind of a national historical record. So they didn't limit themselves to just drought conditions and government relief projects run by the agency. They began to photograph everything about life all over America, like this kind of image here. Some of the stuff is just delightful to find in the file these many years later. Being an academic, Stryker made efforts to ensure that his photographers were knowledgeable about their assignments and really studied. For instance, if Arthur was going to shoot in a cotton growing area, he obviously didn't know about that from his experience in New York. So Stryker expected him to read all about cotton production in this encyclopedia, which Stryker bought a copy of for each of his photographers. So they all had this available to them to consult. And Arthur would have read up on things like the social aspects of the cotton industry, for example, its use of child labor, as he pictured here. And he would have researched the history and culture of cotton growing, including the traditional plantation system of labor there. And this research made the photographers better visual storytellers. So during these formative years, Arthur developed some really great skills that he'd used throughout his career to create compelling picture stories based on a lot of research and knowledge. Stryker sometimes provided shooting scripts that were kind of suggestions for the photographers, and he told them, while you're out there, get a portrait of what life is really like. And you can see the broad range of things they were asked to get pictures of. And they didn't always get everything, but you find a lot of this stuff in the file today. And I think it's interesting to see the last line. This was a shooting script for a small town assignment. And the last line is, what keeps the town going? A study of local industries would be of great value, because you always wonder, where do these people work who live out here in these small towns? And these photographers were tasked with finding that out. Interestingly, Mr. Sackel's study of the Lower East Side that's currently on exhibit at the museum also picked up some of the same kind of information. He documented local industry by photographing Streit's Matzah Bakery and Retail Outlet, which had been this industrial bakery had been a local landmark for 50 years at the time he photographed it in 1975.
In the 1930s, smaller and lighter cameras became available. The 35 millimeter cameras became available. And Dad enjoyed using those cameras because they enabled him to quickly capture intimate scenes. Like this Cuban-American cigar maker working in his home in Key West, Florida, because all of the factories, cigar factories, had closed down in Key West and had moved north. And so these guys were making cigars in their homes. And he loved the spontaneous close-ups he could get, like this one of this little bean picker. And the girl picking cranberries we met earlier, remember her. Unfortunately, the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938 didn't protect certain farm workers, and farmers were still allowed to use child labor.
And I think even to this day, they're allowed to some degree, not maybe the way they did back then.
No, not like they did back then. And I love Dad's caption, which is a title and a caption at the same time. It says, "Girl picker at Cranberry Bog, 3/4 of the pickers are children." He was really disturbed by this. This is a female drum corps, part of the high school parade shot on Main Street in Butte, Montana in 1939. Dad loved shooting parades. That was the thing. He used to drag all of us kids out to parades. Dad's trips to the West resulted in a lifelong affection for cowboy culture. Roy Stryker, who grew up on a ranch in Colorado, said that he was impressed that a Jewish kid from the Bronx could ride a horse while taking pictures. Dad loved the West so much that he published a book titled The American West in the 30s. Years later, in an oral history, Roy Stryker told an interesting story about one of Arthur's assignments. Stryker said, Arthur went out to do a cattle story on the Brewster Ranch in Montana. They were impressed with Arthur's knowledge of the cattle business. They got involved and became Arthur's helpers to get the right pictures. Later on, Mr. Brewster stopped in to see me in Washington and thanked me for sending Arthur Rothstein. He said, Mr. Stryker, we had been quite anti-Semitic at our ranch, but we were so delighted with Arthur Rothstein that our anti-Semitism just left us when we watched Arthur work. Wow. So Dad was an ambassador as well as being a photographer.
Yeah.
After 5 years on the road taking pictures for the federal government, Dad was exhausted. He took a job back in New York City as a staff photographer for Look magazine. This picture story, it was a story, highlighted the indignities of daily life suffered by a young Black man living in the segregated South.
And it was published in the magazine in
It sure
1941. Yeah. So as America mobilized for war, then Roy Stryker's photo unit became part of the U.S. Office of War Information, or OWI. Arthur left Look magazine and returned to work for Stryker. Under the OWI, the photo unit supported the publicity and propaganda needs of the war effort. And you probably can't read it from there. The OWI logo in the corner on the ribbon, it says, "Truth is our strength." That was their motto at the OWI. And I love this picture he took at a TVA dam in Fort Loudon. You had the whole shift assemble for a group photo at the end of their shift, and it was used in a morale poster that you see on the right there during the war. The OWI developed a plan to explicitly counter Joseph Goebbels' worldwide Nazi propaganda program that demonized Jews and others. By contrast, the OWI imagery coming out of America, like this exhibition poster, celebrated our ethnic and racial diversity as evidence of the nation's strength. The title of this poster proclaims, "All of us are Americans." Love that poster.
Yeah,
Several of those are Rothstein images and some by his colleagues at the agency. Here's another great example of the OWI's creative use of documentary photos. In 1942, the photo unit installed this stirring and enormous photo collage in the New York's Grand Central Terminal. It was the largest such photo mural ever produced up to that time. You can see the scale of it by the little people walking down below the collage there. It's designed to create an emotional impact on the public with a combination of images and inspirational quotations. The lower central panel is drawn from 3 of Arthur's photographs. Arthur got the satisfaction not only of seeing this mural go up with his images used in it, but he also had an opportunity to capture some behind the scenes photographs of its creation. So in the file, there are about 50 photographs that he took behind the scenes showing the production process, which was very involved to set this up. And here are just a couple of those. This is the designer of that central panel selecting 3 Rothstein images from the photo unit's vast filing system. He's selecting a mother and daughter in Idaho and a group of children in the daycare center of a California migrant labor camp, combined with the sky from a Montana cattle roundup photo. So kind of a Photoshop before Photoshop exercise in combining images here. And this view shows the scale of the mural's central panel and the methods of its assembly using large strips of photographs carefully aligned in this assembly process. Again, here's the completed mural out in the Grand Central main terminal. By 1943, the photo unit had amassed more than 180,000 photographs that would shape the nation's collective visual memory of the era. Stryker's team set a standard for large-scale photo documentary projects. It's difficult to overstate the lasting impact of this on the photography world, as reflected in the title of this book, which happens to have a nice selfie by Arthur on the cover. And you say your dad loves selfies. He always used the photo timer to set up a tripod and get pictures of himself at work and so on.
Yeah, because he was into photo technology and new devices, gimmicks, and yeah.
And I think the project's importance is also reflected in the cover of this classic text on the history of photography. This is the 5th edition of this tome, and 2 photos, not one, but 2 photos made by Stryker's team are included on the cover of this World History of Photography. You got Arthur's photograph up at the top here of the dust storm, and then Dorothea Lange, of course, her famous migrant mother picture, also on the front cover of this book. In the 1940s, conservative congressmen attacked Stryker's project and the Farm Security Administration in general. Their criticisms sound strikingly familiar today. They said that the Resettlement and Farm Security Administration programs were socialistic or communistic even, and they objected to what they felt was the photo unit's excessively negative portrayal of America. So there were actual threats to really destroy these photographs. And Stryker was pretty savvy and was aware of this, and he got together with the librarian of Congress at the time, Archibald MacLeish, and together they planned and executed this plan to permanently protect and preserve the entire file of photos at the Library of Congress in Washington. And this is the file drawer showing how the photos are mounted, filed, and displayed today. And you can actually go down to the Prints and Photographs reading room at the Library of Congress in Washington and study these images in person, or you can browse them online. They've been digitized now. It's kind of remarkable how often we see Arthur's images pop up unexpectedly. This one, a couple of years ago on the 250th anniversary of the U.S. Postal Service, it published its own history for the first time. There are plenty of books about the history of this Postal Service, but this, for the first time, they produced their own book. And we were very pleased to see one of Arthur's photographs on the cover of this little boy in Vermont reaching into the mailbox. And we know from having the original photograph that they kind of photoshopped the name of the family off the mailbox, I guess, for privacy purposes, which probably makes sense in this case. So that's the McNally family.
Don't tell anybody.
In Vermont. And literally just yesterday, while we were planning this talk, this popped up in the New York Times. This was a review of a book called The Breath of the Gods, History and Future of the Wind, a nonfiction book. And this article used Arthur's famous dust storm image to illustrate, I guess, our sometimes difficult relationship with the atmosphere. Good use of that picture. So in 1943, after more than 7 years with Stryker's photo unit in one form or another, Arthur left OWI to become a non-commissioned officer, a technical sergeant in the U.S. Army Signal Corps. He employed his skills as a photographer to support the war effort against the Axis powers. Historically, the Signal Corps employed every means of communication, including, believe it or not, homing pigeons. And during World War II, I guess with little messages tied to their legs.
Yeah. Okay. And right. And during World War II, the Signal Corps finally retired the pigeon unit and asked Arthur to retrain those pigeoneers as photographers. So Arthur pleaded unsuccessfully, please, please let me train the many professional and amateur photographers already in the Army. But the brass said no and ordered Arthur to retrain the pigeon handlers, which is what he did. So here he is with his trainees, the former pigeon handlers who are now combat photographers. And Dad's in the middle there. He ran into the shot. He's got his hands folded. He's pleased with the job. Arthur's photos told the story of the war from the soldier's point of view, as in this photo titled, Learning to Salute. He received orders to ship out to India as part of the 164th Signal Corps Photo Company. Here he is in India reading news that the war in Europe had ended. That's another selfie, right? But the war was still raging in Asia, and that's where he was. In the final months of the war in Asia, now Lieutenant Arthur Rothstein traveled with a military convoy over the famous Burma Road from India to China. If you look closely, you can see that each small dot on the road is a large Army transport truck. Parts of the road, like this segment in China, were treacherous, muddy, and they didn't have any guardrails. And Dad said the trip was scary as hell, but the scenery was breathtaking.
So when the war ended in 1945 in August, Arthur was kind of stranded in China by a transportation bottleneck because everyone was trying to leave China at the same time and there just weren't enough ships or trains. So by the spring of 46, 6 months after the war, he was still in uniform and still in China. He took a leave, got approved to take a leave from the Signal Corps to take a 3-month assignment as chief photographer in China for a sort of pre-UN agency, the United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Administration, known as UNRWA. China was battle-scarred from years of war with Japan, and people were facing widespread famine, and the economy was in shambles. So UNRWA committed $600 million, but I think it's about $9 billion in today's equivalent today, to fix infrastructure and address the famine and assist war refugees. After his years with Stryker's photo unit, Arthur had the ideal skills for this assignment. He traveled extensively in China, documenting the famine and documenting relief efforts, among many other things. This picture shows the distribution of UNRWA flower. So once again, his photos were newsworthy oftentimes and were published in China's many newspapers.
In real time.
Yeah, in real time.
Yeah.
The photo credit on the clipping says, UNRWA photo by Rothstein. So another interesting story here. From 1938 to 1941, Jews in Germany and Austria were desperate to escape Nazi oppression, but they were not welcome in any country essentially in the world. And amazingly, the international settlement in Japanese-controlled Shanghai was an open port. So it was one of the few places in the world where stateless Jews could enter if they could just get there. So it turned out that 18,000 Jews, mostly from Germany and Austria, were able to escape by fleeing to Shanghai. As shown on the map, they traveled either by steamship through the Suez Canal on a month-long journey or via the Trans-Siberian Railroad, which was kind of a harrowing trip, and then by ship to Shanghai if they went that route. And in 1946, UNRWA had assumed a leading role in assisting the European Jewish refugees now stranded in Shanghai.
Arthur created a photo essay on the community's plight in the spring of 1946. Many of the European refugees had arrived in Shanghai penniless, or nearly so. Jewish charities arranged communal housing for the needy. After the war, many refugees continued to live in these crowded conditions. Arthur visited the community during Passover. At the bottom right of this photo, you can see a box of matzah, which was a gift from one of the Jewish agencies coordinating with UNRWA to help the stranded refugees. This couple is cooking matzah balls on a traditional Chinese fire pot. Destitute refugees were still living in the same dismal, crowded conditions they had endured during the war. This communal I love this kitchen. This communal courtyard kitchen provided meals for the needy. It's interesting to note where the ingredients came from.
By this time, the U.S. Army had occupied Shanghai, and the box of food under the table there turns out to be a box of U.S. Army rations that they were using to cook attempting to use to cook traditional Austrian meals and so on. Very creative people.
Yeah.
Rothstein's photographs showed refugees of all types and sorts and of all ages, including a lot of children who were there. Some had been born there. Some were a little more comfortable in their circumstances than those in the crowded communal homes. Some had found work during their time in Shanghai, and these signs indicate that one medical office, we didn't realize this until we read these carefully after seeing this picture many times, and you realize, oh, this is one office space, and the day is chopped up into hours for different doctors. So they were sharing
Dr. Friedman has the room from 2 to 4. Dr. Kurtz has it from 5 to 6.
And so on. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the majority of the Jewish refugees in Shanghai did manage to survive the war years despite disease, hunger, and the chaotic wartime conditions there. News from Europe arrived slowly to Shanghai, and many were learning that they couldn't return to their homes and businesses in Europe for obvious reasons. Hitler's death camps had been discovered, and news of them was getting out, and relief agencies like the Red Cross were attempting to reunite the few survivors with their families. In this poignant photograph, Jewish refugees in Shanghai searched lists of concentration camp survivors, probably put up by the Red Cross, hoping to find missing family members, although few did. And this last picture from the Shanghai group is also very interesting. This shows a dozen anxious refugees looking at the incoming mail as it's sorted. And Chinese officials had decreed that all foreigners had to leave China. The Civil War was approaching Shanghai, so they were all pretty desperate to find some place to go after finding years of temporary sanctuary in Shanghai. So immigration was almost impossible without governmental approvals and help from relief agencies and probably family members in other countries and so on. So the postal deliveries were anxiously awaited and could bring news of immigration application status or news on loved ones left behind in Europe, for example. The refugees' lives were on hold like those of millions of refugees throughout the world today.
Yeah, my dad always hoped that his intimate portraits of the dispossessed would move people and governments to action. Arthur documented daily life in China for UNRWA just as he had done in America for Stryker's photo unit. After his temporary assignment in China was completed, UNRWA arranged his travel back to New York City, where he returned to Look magazine. Arthur was very frustrated that his metal footlocker that contained all the prints and negatives from his UNRWA assignment never arrived, and for 25 years he assumed that they were lost. Obviously, they weren't lost, they were found, and I'll tell you that remarkable story in just a few minutes. So for the next 25 years, he served as director of photography at Look magazine. This was the golden age of magazine photography. Look was about people, culture, and news. Picture magazines enjoyed enormous circulation. In the era before television, they were a primary source for news and entertainment. The very weekend he returned home from Asia, Arthur met Grace Goodman. They had a lot in common and wasted no time getting married and soon had 4 children.
Including
me.
Yeah.
Arthur worked tirelessly at Look, supervising all photographic operations and completing almost 1,000 assignments. He created picture stories on topics from medicine.
That's an interesting picture. Yeah.
The brains, to fashion, to food. He obviously shot in color as well as black and white. In fact, he loved shooting food. The war was over, but Arthur was still drawn to stories of immigrants and refugees. These are refugees from Europe arriving in New York City in 1946. For Look, Dad photographed many celebrities. This is Salvador Dali. And here's a montage of the glamorous and talented actor and singer Eartha Kitt. And here's Dad with the 1976 Olympic decathlon gold medalist, Bruce Jenner, better known now as Caitlyn Jenner. Mm-hmm. He even covered the occasional celebrity wedding. This is the receiving line at the wedding of movie stars Tony Curtis on the left and Janet Leigh, soon to be the parents of Jamie Lee Curtis. The other fellow is actor-comedian Jerry Lewis, who one can only imagine asked Tony, "May I kiss the bride?" Dad was extremely grateful for his career, and he made every effort to give back to the photography community. He was a recipient of more than 36 photography awards. He was a juror for the Pulitzer Prize in Photography. He co-founded the American Society of Magazine Photographers, now media photographers. During his years at Look and Parade magazines, he taught at many schools, including Columbia University School of Journalism. It seemed that Dad knew everyone and everyone knew him. That's him with 2 of his mentors, photographers Ansel Adams and Dorothea Lange. Dad hired and mentored many photographers. Here's a young man Dad mentored at Look. You may have heard of him. It's Stanley Kubrick. He began working at Look at 17 and later became an Oscar-winning movie director. Dad wrote numerous columns and articles on photography. He published 9 books, including widely read textbooks on photojournalism and documentary photography. Dad was also a technical innovator. He helped invent a process to mass-produce images that appear 3-dimensional to the naked eye. This was used to create photo covers, cover photos for Venture, which was a popular travel magazine. And do you remember those 3D baseball cards?
And for many other purposes.
Right. We're obviously just scratching the surface of Dad's 50-year career. He photographed 9 presidents and 3 popes, one of them with his 3D process. That's Paul VI. After Look magazine ceased to print in 1971, Arthur became the photo editor at Parade magazine, the most widely read magazine in America. For this cover, Dad had a little fun using himself as the model. I mentioned earlier that many of his China photos were lost for 25 years. Well, here's the story of their recovery. One of his early assignments for Parade magazine in 1972 was a cover story on Austrian diplomat Kurt Waldheim. The United Nations had just elected Herr Waldheim to the first of 2 5-year terms as Secretary General of the UN. At the photo shoot, Arthur struggled to get Waldheim and the family dog to relax. To make small talk, Dad said, "You know, I used to work for your outfit." Mr. Waldheim, who was hiding his Nazi past, replied nervously, What outfit?" Arthur explained innocently, "I worked for the United Nations in China." Dad told Secretary Waldheim that when UNRWA shipped him back to New York in 1946, his footlocker full of photos never arrived. And Waldheim said, "Perhaps I can help you, Arthur." Mr. Waldheim relaxed and Dad got the cover shot. And a week later, Dad received a note directing him to a UN warehouse in Queens. After some digging, he unearthed his dusty but unopened footlocker, and his photographs and negatives were in pristine condition. So that's the story of how the UN Secretary General with a hidden Nazi past helped my father, my Jewish father, recover his lost photos of the Jewish refugee community in Shanghai. Finally, a small selection of pictures from our family photo albums. For much of my childhood, my mother, Grace, operated a portrait studio and was the official photographer for the city of New Rochelle, New York, where we lived. Our lives were filled with photographs by my mother and father. Some appeared as advertisements featuring me, that's me, and my siblings as models. My father's photographs were even in my school textbooks. When I think about the power of images to evoke memory and emotion, whether they're documentary or family photos, I'm reminded of my favorite scene from the Mad Men television series. Mad Men, of course, is about the advertising business in the 1960s. The picture magazines like Look Magazine and Life Magazine were driven by advertising, so I could totally relate to Mad Men. In my favorite scene, advertising executive Don Draper is making a pitch to the guys from Kodak. Kodak was looking for an ad campaign for their new slide projector. Of course, we all shared our picture stories with slide projectors like this before Instagram and PowerPoint and Facebook. The Kodak guys thought the ad should emphasize the projector's space-age technology, and maybe they should even call it the wheel. But Don Draper had a better idea. Don said that some customers can develop a sentimental bond with a product. A deeper bond, he said, can be nostalgia. Nostalgia, he said, literally means the pain from an old wound. It's a twinge in your heart, far more powerful than memory alone. He said this device isn't a spaceship. It's a time machine. It goes backwards, forwards. It takes us to a place where we ache to go again. Don said, it's not called the wheel. It's called the carousel, because a carousel lets us travel the way a child travels, round and round. Round and round, and back home again to a place where we know we are loved. Okay, that's our talk. Thank you very much. Maya?
All right, thank you so much. That was wonderful. And as everyone commented, so many fantastic photos, which I'm not surprised by, but still, so many thank yous in the chat.
Oh.
I would love to get to a few of these questions in the chat, and then I would also love to include Rick Sackles, who is the photographer of our current exhibition. And there are so many tie-ins, but we have one question that asks: Are all of the photographs owned by various entities that he worked for, either government or commercial?
Dad's work for the government is in the public domain.
So
Mhm.
generally, yes, he was on staff at Look magazine, not a freelancer. So the photos he took for that were generally owned by the magazine, etc. Yes.
Mhm. Thank you. We have another question that asks, I know from reading about the FSA that Arthur helped Roy set up the filing system for their FSA photos. Was his personal files as well organized?
I think there were a number of people who struggled with organizing the FSA files over the
Yeah,
years.
yeah.
Probably Arthur had some input, and
Yeah, I don't think he was
he helped transition
the
the
one
files.
person.
He helped transition the Look files over to the Library of Congress
Right,
when it went out
right.
of business.
He was responsible for getting those over
his-
to the Library of Congress so they would be protected.
But his personal files were, pretty well organized, I would say. Not so formally as in most archives, but yes, he did have a good handle on it.
And we're working on them all the time. What we have, our small family archive, we're working on organization. In fact, last summer we had two of our granddaughters helping us work on it.
It's a family affair.
Yes.
And we have a comment from Marjorie who says that the photos really capture the many aspects of American life. And I wanted to go into that a little bit because I think that something we can also think about when we look at our exhibition is that these are documentary photos from a very specific moment in history, oftentimes, excepting some of the commercial things. But right now, looking at them in 2025, for Rick Sackel's exhibition that's, from 1975 to 2025 for this, it's a different time span, but, do we feel I mean, I certainly feel this way, but the fact that Marjorie is saying the photos really capture the many aspects of American life, for you having, or or for your father, having these photos come out the moment they're happening as documentary photographs versus looking at them now, how do you feel things have changed, stayed the same?
What do you think,
Well,
IG?
It's interesting. As we mentioned, there are some, themes that come around again over time in history, and that's interesting to note about the current objections to the way history is depicted, and there were some similar objections to the way that agency was capturing America's photo album at the time. So that's interesting. And others have gone back and revisited some of the locations where Arthur took pictures, and that's interesting to see. Bill Ganzel did a book finding many of the people that Arthur photographed and interviewing them and finding out where their lives went and so on. It's always fascinating to see how things change over time, just as it is on the Lower East Side.
And you both, or at least you grew up on the Lower East Side, right?
No.
Or you live there now?
Well, I lived in Peter Cooper Village, but
Right,
that's
that's
not
what
the
I was
Lower East Side.
remembering. That's what
Yeah.
I was remembering.
Close,
Yeah, I know
close,
I know that you were talking about being local.
Right.
Yes. Um, yes, as, one of our commenters said in the chat, yes, in his day, there was no social media, so we needed things like this to document.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
Yes, we have a lot of thank yous for a fabulous nostalgic trip through history. So again, thank you so much. And also a lot of people that noted that a lot of people didn't know that he also went abroad. He wasn't just taking documentary photos in America. He was also taking all of these photos abroad, the Shanghai ghetto. And folks really appreciate his insight into those moments in history. I want to Richard Sackles, I'm going to prompt you to unmute here. I would love to bring you in and talk a little bit about a similar theme where we're looking at these documentary photos which were so in the moment at the time of capturing, but we're looking at them later with different eyes. Do you want to, first of all, can you tell everyone who maybe this is their first time hearing about your exhibition a little bit about it, and then also comment on that?
Sure. Basically, I was looking for where my grandmother was born, which I never found. but I looked around and I saw the empty lots and boarded up shuls and some that were still operating. So being with a research background, I parked myself into the 42nd Street Library and pulled up maps from the early 1900s. And I had a communal registry, a Jewish communal registry from 1917, and it for New York, and it listed every synagogue in New York City, all five boroughs.
Cool.
But I obviously concentrated on the Lower East Side. So I, in a day before computers and cell phones, I made lists that I carried around with me. I listed all the synagogues, their addresses, when they were founded, who was the rabbi, how many people they had worked as members. And then I went back to the Lower East Side and tried to find them by the addresses I had.
Oh.
And some I found, some I didn't, most I didn't. But I made a checklist where I found, I checked. When that wasn't there, was an X. And I still have all that. The thing that amazes me is, first of all, I'm humbled that you even mentioned my name in the same breath as your father. I am not a professional photographer. I was doing it strictly as my first camera, real camera, from a Brownie. I graduated to a 35 millimeter, and I was just playing and just went around, just snapped pictures. And again, as well, if your father was able to develop his own, right after mostly, I assume when he took them, I had to send them out. So it might be anywhere from 2 weeks to a month before I get the photos back.
Oh, wow.
So I had to write everything.
Yeah, Rick,
Yeah,
I was
go
going
ahead.
to say, it's interesting, your photo story, your trip down memory lane in 1975 was really wonderful, compelling, beautiful pictures. Everybody should go see them. But I gotta say that in 1975, it was very cool that you captured how much of the Lower East Side still had that character, that old character. Orchard Street still had those booths, right, with the awnings. It looked not a whole lot different than it used to look in the 40s. It really hadn't changed all that much. And that's all gone now. So it's lovely that you captured that.
Yes. The other thing is, they sat in my photo albums literally for 50 years. I would look at it from time to time, but my partnership with the museum made this possible.
Oh, it's
Otherwise, they'd
great.
still be sitting in my photo albums, and I would still look at them. I still do, as well as other photographs. But again, I'm not, nor was I, a professional photographer. I didn't even become an amateur photographer. I was just out there taking photographs of what I
Going
thought
down
was
memory
interesting.
lane. Yeah.
Yes. So again,
Lovely.
I'm humbled that you mentioned my name in the same breath as your father. It's
Oh,
Well, I'm impressed that you did the research and that
Yeah.
you did, and really made a
I'd like to see that
serious
list
effort, yeah.
of the synagogues.
if you send me your email or text message,
Okay.
I can scan it, and
Thank you.
send you the lists that I did. The thing that I also had to do was, because when was I going to remember when I took those photographs? Where was I when I took the photographs? So I had a small little pocket notebook, and I'd write down the date, where it was, if we're an intersection, what I was taking a picture of, because I knew I would never remember when I finally got the photographs back. So I wrote all that on the back of every photograph, and I've always done that with all of my photographs.
That was
that I
often a
took.
challenge for the FSA photographers who would send their film back, and then when they got back to the office, they would have to sit down and try to caption things. And hopefully they had good notes and records of where they were, but it wasn't always easy. And as a result, you see a lot of untitled pictures in the file that, for whatever reason, did not get a caption, and it's hard work.
And sometimes some of the photographs were sent out to magazines and newspapers even before the photographers got back to Washington to
proper captions.
proper captions, right? And so they ended up with all kinds of miscaptions. Yeah.
Has that been a struggle now when you're trying to go through and organize, when there are these kind of official captions from the government that you find are incorrect?
It happens. Let me tell you, I've gotten in touch with the people at Princeton Photographs more than once to tell them, hey, that wasn't shot in Wyoming, that was shot in Montana or whatever. Yeah, it happens.
And talking about kind of the current consumption of all these photos, what I understand people probably use them all the time for research, because they are public domain. People could go and look for them.
Yeah.
But what kind of exhibitions, if any, have been going on in the past few years? I know you've had some. How has kind of the presentation and consumption of these changed over the years?
We actually have a wonderful exhibition right now in Nevada, in Las Vegas, Nevada.
The Nevada State,
At the
Museum.
Nevada State Museum. And so who knew that 1940 was a pivotal year for the state, for the Silver State, for the state of Nevada. And Dad was sent there on to capture what was going on. He was sent there on assignment to capture what was going on. And so there's a fantastic story on the walls in this museum that we have a great curator there, and he
Well, and people may be familiar with the Federal Writers Project and the guides that they made to all 48 states and a lot of regions of the country back in the late 30s, early 40s. And it turns out that a lot of photo unit photographs were used in those books. So when we looked at the Nevada book published in 1941, it had about 100 plus pictures in it, and about a third of them were Arthur's from his trip.
really helped with the show.
It really covered the state fully in 1940. So those pictures are, they're still turning up in places that we didn't know they existed. And it's quite a fascinating collection.
Right.
So oftentimes these folks, when they're trying to do kind of narrative exhibitions like this, and then do they often reach out to you saying, hey, I just found these 10, 50 photographs of your father's that we'd like to use for this? Or do you often kind of bring things together and say, hey, this would be fantastic?
It's usually me that brings it to them. It's usually me that makes first contact and says, I got this great idea for a show. And then, and most of the time, people are very open and get right back to me, and we build a communication and a relationship. Because the pictures are so terrific. They're so wonderful.
Yeah.
They tell such a great story and
the
a wonderful story about America.
The digitization was a major project, and they've just been finishing up the proper
At the Library of Congress.
digitization of the collection. So until recently, it was hard to get good digital images of the pictures.
But now, go online to the Library of Congress and put in Arthur Rothstein and see what comes up. 15,000 photographs. You'll be happy.
Just a few.
Are
And
you
I mean,
familiar
especially oh, sorry, go ahead, Rick.
I was just going to say, are you familiar, or your father familiar with David Goldblatt?
I'm not sure.
He was the father of photography in South Africa. His family emigrated there, and I was actually contacted by his grandson.
So he was about Dad's age?
Yes, yes.
Uh-huh. Well, they might have known each other. It was said that Dad knew everyone, went everywhere, and brought his camera. That's what they used to say about Dad. So it's very possible he knew this guy.
Okay.
And with him bringing his camera everywhere, of course, Rick's project was purely for himself back in the day. It wasn't, he wasn't commissioned to do any of that. But I'm sure your father also, he loved taking photos, and he did it all the time for just himself.
All the time.
How did those differ from the ones he was commissioned to do?
Oh, gosh.
If at all.
Okay, so my parents had a wonderful house in New Rochelle, New York, and in the back behind the house, there was a beautiful garden. My parents were both gardeners and horticulturists, and Dad was always photographing the lilies in the lily pond or the greenhouse or what was coming up or he was constantly photographing the garden. And of course, he had 4 children. He was constantly photographing his children. So, he was always, and wherever we went, he took his camera, and at least one camera, usually 2. And he would have them both on his neck, one for short distance, one for long distance.
Yeah, so that
So you could go
your
fast.
family's, I would
Yeah.
say your family's set of
Yeah.
family albums is kind of the, I call it the baby boom in a box. You know, they have covered the baby boom very thoroughly during those years, post-war years.
That's the show I want to have.
Yeah.
Baby boom in a box.
It sounds like a good show. Well, we are getting close to 7:15, which I would like to send folks home to their dinners at 7:15. Is there any last questions anyone would like to ask either Rick or our speakers this evening? Is there any last words you want to share with us, Anne or
I
Rick?
just want to say thank you so much, Maya, for this opportunity. It's
Thank you so
just
much.
wonderful to be able to share Dad's legacy. We enjoy it so much.
And thank
Thank
you,
you.
Rick,
This
for
was a
preserving
wonderful
Yes.
program.
your photos and caring
Yes,
for
and
them
thank you,
and
Rick, for
bringing them out.
making this possible. We love having these themes that we can explore with our programming at the museum. And here it was documentary photography. So stay tuned for our next exhibition, all about birth traditions. Definitely a pivot, but definitely
That sounds like fun too.
extremely interesting. So if anyone would like to attend our exhibition opening, that is going to be December 4th at 6 p.m. in person at the museum. But please come by and see Rick's show before it leaves. Right before Thanksgiving, so please come by. And thank you so much to Anne and Brodie for this wonderful presentation. It was truly terrific to
Thank you.
remember your father this way, truly terrific. And everyone
Thank
can
you.
look at all of these online because they're public domain. So if anyone wants to explore the 15,000 photos, you are more than welcome to do so. Thank you all so much and have a wonderful evening.
You too. Thank you very much,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.